Welcome to the Alzheimer's Journey. I'm William A. Van Horn, MD, a medical doctor who specializes in Alzheimer's disease. The Alzheimer's Association estimates that 5.2 million Americans currently are disabled by Alzheimer's disease. Another 15 million Americans take care of people who are disabled by Alzheimer's disease. And another 5 to 10 million Americans have the memory loss associated with Alzheimer's disease. That's 25 to 30 million Americans right now directly impacted by Alzheimer's disease. Another study estimates that by the year 2050, 1 billion people worldwide will have Alzheimer's disease. 1 billion people, imagine that. Now, what does that mean for you, for me, for your family, for my family? What it means is we are in a war with Alzheimer's disease, a war that most people don't know anything about. A war that many doctors don't know how to treat, and a war that most people don't realize they're in it till they've significantly lost the war. The Alzheimer's Journey is the battle plan to help you and your family win the war with Alzheimer's disease. Does winning the war mean that if you take everything you learn in the Alzheimer's Journey and apply it to your life, you won't get Alzheimer's disease? No, I can't guarantee that. Winning the war means that if you apply what you learn in the Alzheimer's Journey, you will significantly reduce your risk of Alzheimer's disease. Does winning the war mean that if you have lost memory, you can bring your memory back? No. As I tell my patients, you can't bring back dead brain cells. We lose memory because we lose brain cells. But what the Alzheimer's Journey will do for you to help you win the war is help you slow down the progression of the memory loss. Does winning the war mean that if you have a family member in the later stages who's depressed, anxious, agitated, out of control, that you can get them like they were 10 years before? No. At that stage of the disease, winning the war means that with the help of the Alzheimer's Journey, you can restore dignity and relationship to that person. This is an area of passion for me. I am the medical director of one of the only hospital units in the state of South Carolina that takes demented, agitated, depressed, screaming, yelling, paranoid patients. I love the transformation when these very miserable people come in, but 10 days, 14 days later, they walk out smiling, holding the hand of the person they were hitting 2 weeks before. That these people often don't get the care they need. And at the end of life, I emphasize to families that Alzheimer's disease is not a disease of the heart or the soul. Alzheimer's disease is the disease of the cortex of the brain, the part we think with. The person you love is still there experiencing you 2 to 3, 4, 5 years after they've forgotten your name. And you can maintain with proper medication a deep, loving, valuing relationship with that person long after they've stopped thinking. So in your war with Alzheimer's disease, what will the Alzheimer's Journey do for you? Alzheimer's Journey will arm you with the information, the understanding, and the treatment protocols to first significantly reduce your risk of Alzheimer's disease. Secondly, if you've lost some memory, to substantially slow down that memory loss. And finally, if you have a loved one with later stage Alzheimer's disease, Alzheimer's Journey will enable you to restore dignity and relationship to the person you love. It's important to understand that the Alzheimer's Journey is not an esoteric philosophical discussion about Alzheimer's disease. It's not about hoping for future research. It's about what you can do now. The Alzheimer's Journey is a practical, directive battle plan to help you and your family win the war with Alzheimer's disease. I am not a researcher. I'm a clinician. I treat people and families. The Alzheimer's Journey is the information and data in my mind transferred to your home. I'm excited about the Alzheimer's Journey because I know it will help you and millions of other families. Today, you're going to learn the new perspective about Alzheimer's disease. The perspective is practical, understandable, and will empower you to win the war with Alzheimer's disease. It is a perspective that most people have no idea about. It is a perspective that most doctors have no idea about. And it's a perspective that I personally, as a physician, had no idea about 15 years ago before I became an Alzheimer's specialist. I was treating patients, and I had some Alzheimer's patients, not the hundreds like I have now, but I really didn't know what I was treating. The problem is that most people and most doctors perceive Alzheimer's disease as a disease that attacks old people, as if we're just powerless victims hoping not to get Alzheimer's disease. I was at a meeting with a neurologist. He was presenting information on an Alzheimer's drug. My wife and I went there, we went to dinner, and we're sitting there, and a family doctor asked this neurologist, who was an Alzheimer's expert, is there anything that you can do to keep from getting Alzheimer's disease? The neurologist laughed and said, just don't get your head hit. I whispered to my wife, are you kidding me? Here's an expert on Alzheimer's disease, and all he says is don't get your head hit? In the Alzheimer's journey, you're going to learn over 50 things you can do to impact your risk of Alzheimer's disease. And all he said was don't get your head hit. That's the old perspective. I gave a talk in Charleston at an Alzheimer's Association meeting. There were about 100 people there. I gave a 45-minute discussion about the new perspective. And it's about 10% of what is in the Alzheimer's Journey series. A lady came up to me after the talk and she said, Dr. Van Horn, I loved your talk. She said, I've been coming here for 25 years. I'm the head of the Alzheimer's Association chapter in Charleston, and I've never heard 80% of what you said. She'd been following this for 25 years, and she hadn't heard 80% of the 10% that I have in the Alzheimer's journey. In another case, one of my inspirations for the Alzheimer's journey was a man named John up in New York. My wife and I were in Saratoga Springs at the Saratoga National Race Park. That's where they run the Travers Race, which is the 4th biggest race after the Triple Crown, horse racing. And at the end of the racing, my wife and I sat down to have a glass of wine. And a man walks up, introduces himself. His name was John. His wife was Susie. And he's just starts talking to me. And he says, what do you do? I said, I'm an Alzheimer's doctor. And he said, you are? He said, wow, my mom has Alzheimer's and my sister has Alzheimer's. And I said to him, how old are you, John? He said, 65. I said, what are you doing to decrease your risk of Alzheimer's disease? He looked at me astonished. What do you mean, what am I doing? Of course, there's nothing you can do, right? Now, the kicker to this story, the amazing thing, is John flew in from his vineyard in California that he owned on his private jet with his private pilot to watch his $1 million horse run. What does that mean? John had unlimited resources and he had no idea whatsoever that he was going to get Alzheimer's and he was doing nothing about it. That is the old perspective. All these people have the same thing in common. They perceived Alzheimer's disease as a disease that attacks old people and that they were powerless victims and could do nothing about it. That is simply not true. The new perspective is that Alzheimer's disease is not a disease that attacks old people, and there's a lot you can do about it, and you are certainly not powerless, and you don't have to be a victim. To understand the new perspective, you have to understand the aging body. The simplest way to understand the aging body is to look in the mirror and look at your skin. We all know that our skin ages. Why does it age? It ages because of cellular changes, cellular loss. One of my wife's friends tells my wife that she has porcelain skin. Well, one of the reasons she has porcelain skin was she grew up in upstate New York where the sun doesn't come out very much. She didn't get a lot of sun exposure, so at 42 her skin still looks really good. On the other hand, I go to this piano bar where the average age is probably about 60. And I'll see some women walk in who are from South Carolina who look, if you look at them, their body could look 35 or 40. Everything about them looks young. They turn around, you look at their face, and the skin damage is so apparent. They look 70. So everyone knows that their skin ages. What most people don't realize is as your skin is aging, also are your internal organs aging. Your liver's aging, your heart's aging, your lungs are aging, and your brain is aging. There's a reservoir of cells that each of our organs can lose before we start losing functioning. So the liver can lose whatever, 40% or so before you have liver failure. You can lose part of your kidneys before you get kidney failures. Obviously, you can smoke a long time and lose a lot of your lung before you actually have lung failure. Well, the same thing's true about the brain. There's a reservoir of brain cells that you can lose before you actually lose thinking ability. And that's estimated to be as much as 20 to 30% of your brain. So therefore, the brain is aging just like the rest of the body is aging, because of cellular loss and cellular change. Now, if you think about your physical organs being in a race to see which one can live the longest. If you go back to 1900, there was hardly any Alzheimer's disease. Do you know why? The brain was winning the race. People were maintaining their reservoir They were losing cells as they aged, but they were maintaining their reservoir to the point that they never lost thinking ability. Why? Because people died at an average age of 50 in 1900. Now people live to an average age of 80, and they are losing their reservoir because we lose our reservoir over decades. So people are dying at an average age of 80 or so now, and what's happening is now the heart and the lungs and the kidneys are winning the race, and the brain is losing the race. The brain is dying faster than the rest of the organs. We have a much better understanding of how to keep the heart alive and the lungs alive than we do the brain alive. If you keep your brain energized, healthy, and alive longer than your heart and your lungs, you never get Alzheimer's disease. The goal of the Alzheimer's journey is to help your brain win the race so that your brain outlives your heart and your lungs. So what exactly is this new perspective? The new perspective is that Alzheimer's disease is not a disease that attacks old people. Alzheimer's disease is the end product of your brain aging and dying over decades. And most importantly, you can intervene in that aging death process. Let me say it again. Your brain ages and dies over decades, from time in your 20s, somewhere in there, to whatever, 70, over 50 to 60 years. And there are many factors that promote the health and the lifespan of the brain. There are many factors that accelerate the death of the brain. What we are calling Alzheimer's disease is simply the loss of thinking and functioning because of brain death. The Alzheimer's journey gives you the battle plan to maximize the life factors and minimize the death factors. You are not powerless, and you don't have to be a victim. Now, if you know much about Alzheimer's disease and you studied anything about it, you might ask about what about the pathology in the brain? That means what's wrong in the brain when they do an autopsy after someone has died from Alzheimer's disease. If you go in the brain, you will see some pathology, one being amyloid plaques, another being neurofibrillary tangles. Now, amyloid plaques are the hallmark of the disease. This is what they've been calling the disease for 100 years. We've been doing research, millions and millions of dollars of research to try to get rid of the amyloid plaques. Because what happens is there is a cascade of events that happens that as your brain dies and the cells dies, there's some inflammation, there's neurofibrillary tangles, and there's amyloid plaques. So they've been trying to find a drug to get rid of the amyloid plaques. Well, guess what? All amyloid plaques are is dead brain. They're the garbage left over after the cell has died. Now, what evidence supports this? They actually came up with an antibody, would go into the brain and attack the amyloid plaque and wipe it out. They gave it to a group of Alzheimer's patients who had significant cognitive loss. Their thinking ability was way down. It worked. It wiped out the amyloid plaques. But guess what happened after they came out of the treatment? Their thinking ability was no better. Their cognitive loss was just as great. All that happened was the amyloid was gone, the brain shrunk. Because amyloid plaques are not the disease. Recently, a neurologist has been talking about the concept that amyloid beta protein, which formed together to make the amyloid plaques, that amyloid beta protein is the toxic substance in Alzheimer's disease. And he's arguing that amyloid plaques are actually neuroprotective. Now, if you caught what I just said, after 50 years, they're calling the amyloid plaques neuroprotective, saying the amyloid beta proteins, because the amyloid plaques form to get rid of the amyloid beta proteins. I don't agree with him either. I think, as I said, there's a cascade of events that take place. Inflammation, neurofibrillary tangles, amyloid beta proteins, amyloid plaques, okay? That's what's happening when your brain cell is dying. That is not what's causing your brain cell to die. There are a multitude of factors that you're going to learn about that cause your brain cell to die. Our current approach to the treatment of Alzheimer's disease is like you taking your car, driving it over a cliff, and in the middle of the air, you try to keep it from crashing and dying. What we will teach you with the Alzheimer's journey is to keep your car from going over the cliff. In other words, if you keep your brain cell healthy, you keep your brain healthy, it doesn't enter into the death process. Does that mean that if you apply what you learn in the Alzheimer's journey, your brain won't die? No, your brain's going to die anyway. Your brain is dying if you're over 30 years old. The question is how fast it dies. Remember the race. If your brain stays alive, healthy, and energized longer than the rest of your body, then you never get Alzheimer's disease. The key to treating Alzheimer's disease is to keep your reservoir around, keep your brain around, and keep it as healthy as possible. To better understand this new perspective, come with me to Albuquerque, New Mexico. I grew up in Albuquerque, New Mexico, the home of the New Mexico Lobo basketball team. The University of New Mexico has this arena that's underground, so they call it the Pit. It seats about 20,000 people. And it packs out for every single game. It's the big sport in Albuquerque and in New Mexico. And my dad was fortunate enough to get front row seats in this 20,000 seat arena. So I spent many nights at the bottom of the floor yelling at the refs, cheering, and enjoying the games. Well, imagine that you and I are in the arena on the floor, but everything's gone. You have the ceiling, you have the floor, and you have the walls. That's all. Now, very slowly, you see some light bulbs start coming on. And then, gradually, the arena starts filling up with light bulbs. That's your brain at conception slowly developing cells. And so over development, from the time you're conceived, somewhere into 25 or 30, you develop more and more brain cells and more connections between those brain cells. So imagine the arena completely full of light bulbs and connections. It's estimated at maximum brain development, again, somewhere 25, 30 in there, where you reach your maximum number of cells, that you have approximately 100 billion brain cells and 1 trillion connections. So just think about that. The brain is an electrochemical factory, just full of electricity flowing. Now, I'm going to use this analogy to help you understand the 4 stages of the war on Alzheimer's. Stage number 1 is preparation, the development of your brain. As you're going to learn, if you don't develop as many brain cells, you have less to lose. If you don't develop as many connections, you have less to lose. Stage 2, protecting your reservoir. Remember that reservoir? The number of cells you can actually lose before you lose memory, before you lose thinking ability? Protecting the reservoir is stage 2 of the war. Stage 3 of the war, battling memory loss. Now you've lost enough brain cells, it's actually affecting your thinking. That's an aggressive time to battle the war on Alzheimer's. And stage 4, restoring dignity and relationship. This is when someone's lost so much of their brain, they're out of control, they can't relate to you anymore. That's the time you can restore dignity and relationship. Let's talk about stage 1 of the war with Alzheimer's disease. Preparation, the stage of opportunity. Why is it the stage of opportunity? Well, think about your brain cell as being a soldier. Think about your connections as being weapons. Obviously, if you're going to war, the more soldiers and weapons you have, the more you are likely to win the war. Well, the same thing is true about Alzheimer's disease. Remember, the new perspective is Alzheimer's disease is a function of your brain aging and cells dying over decades, over 40, 50, 60 years. So consequently, the more cells you have when it starts dying at maximum brain development, the more you have to lose. And there's a lot of evidence to support this. The other thing that's important to recognize about preparation, stage 1 of the war with Alzheimer's, I'm talking about in the womb, childhood development, young adult development. I'm talking about fighting the war before you're 20. Now think about how crazy that concept is compared to what most people think, which is that it starts when you're 80 or when you're 70. Well, the reality is it starts with the development of your brain. I have a patient named Sally, who her mother was very old when she gave birth to her, and before she was born, they did an amniocentesis. An amniocentesis, they had a big needle put in the womb, get out some amniotic fluid, and they tested. Well, when they were doing the test, they stabbed Sally's brain. Sally lost a significant number of brain cells. So maybe she came out with 60 million or 60 billion instead of 100 billion. I don't know. What I do know is that she has a lot less to lose. She's already getting some of the memory loss of a 70-year-old person, and she's 31 years old. I have another patient who's 35. He has cerebral palsy, and his brain was damaged during the birth process. Now he's 35, and according to his mother, over the last 4 years, he showed the exact memory loss of an Alzheimer's patient who's 70. So we're going to be treating him for Alzheimer's disease. There's a nun study where they looked at nuns and they looked at their language skills in their 20s. And the nuns with good language skills, approximately 11% of them ended up with Alzheimer's disease at 65. The nuns with bad language skills, approximately 80-something% of them ended up with Alzheimer's disease at 85. Why? The nuns who did not develop the language skills did not develop as much brain mass. They didn't have as many soldiers or weapons to start the war. Consequently, they lost the war earlier. They couldn't protect their reservoir because their reservoir wasn't as big. There's also a lot of evidence that people who get more education and maintain a lot of mental activity keep their brain alive longer. And at the very least, if they don't get less Alzheimer's, which appears they may, they certainly get the disease later on. Again, why? Well, let's say you're losing 10 billion cells every 10 years. Well, obviously, if you have 120 billion, it takes longer to lose your reservoir. If you have 80 billion, you lose your reservoir sooner. So stage 1 is preparation. Go tell a family member that the war on Alzheimer's disease starts in childhood. Nobody will believe you. Let's move on to stage 2 of the war, protecting your reservoir. Protecting your reservoir is the most important stage in the war on Alzheimer's. And it's also the longest. Remember, you have a reservoir of cells that you can lose before you start losing memory. And that's estimated to be 20 to 30% of your brain. Again, 100 billion cells, 1 trillion connections at the time of maximum brain development. That means you can lose like 20 billion cells and 200 billion connections, maybe even 30 billion and 300 billion before you start losing thinking ability. Now again, it starts in young adulthood. Let's go back to the pit. Now look at the arena now. As you see, it's still really, really bright. However, you'll notice maybe 5% of the cells are gone, maybe 5% of the connections are gone. That's the brain of a 35-year-old. Now, let's go back again. About 10% of the cells are gone. About 10% of the connections are gone. Now you're looking at the brain of about a 50-year-old. Now think about that. So from early adulthood to 50, possibly as much as 10 billion brain cells are gone and 100 billion connections. Now, look at this brain. Now you can see there's about 20% missing, maybe 20% connection, 20% cells. Again, this is about a 65-year-old. Now, the three of these people have in common, the 35-year-old, the 50, and the 65, is they have not lost thinking. But as you can see with the 65-year-old, quite a bit of the brain is gone. Now, look at this brain. About 30% is gone. Now, this is a 75-year-old with Alzheimer's disease, early to middle Alzheimer's disease. The importance of this is if you look chronologically, he did not get attacked when he hit 75. His brain started dying way back here. Protecting your reservoir is those 4 to 6 decades of your brain dying. And there's a lot that you can do about it. The amazing thing, just imagine if I went out and asked 100 30-year-olds, what are you doing to protect against Alzheimer's disease? They'd laugh at me. What if I asked 100 45-year-olds, what are you doing to protect against Alzheimer's disease? They'd probably laugh too. If I asked 100 55-year-olds, well, they would say, probably be thinking a little bit about it, but they'd obviously not be doing anything about it. They'd probably say, well, I've been worried, but is there something I can do? I actually went to dinner with my wife here in Myrtle Beach. We're sitting down at the bar. Guy comes up with his wife, he sits down. He's 55 years old. He has 8 siblings. All 8 of them had Alzheimer's disease. Now, his risk, he's getting Alzheimer's disease. What was he doing to protect his reservoir? 0. 55 years old, doing nothing. That's how lacking the information and the understanding is when it comes to protecting your reservoir. If you remember nothing else about protecting your reservoir, remember this. A brain cell that dies in your 30s is just as critical as a brain cell that dies in your 70s. A brain cell that dies in your 40s, your 50s, your 60s are just as critical to your ultimate possibility of having Alzheimer's as a brain cell that dies in your 70s. Again, this is the new perspective. It's not like you hit 70 and something enters your brain and starts killing it. It's been dying for 50 years. Now let's move on to stage 3, battling memory loss. Now understand, if you win the war in stage 2, if you protect your reservoir, if you keep at least 90% of your brain around, say 85, 80, you never lose memory. You never lose thinking. So you only get into stage 3, battling memory loss, after you've lost your reservoir. Now, how do you know if you've lost your reservoir? Well, there's a simple test that you're going to learn in the Alzheimer's journey that will identify 90% sensitive and 90% specific for early Alzheimer's disease. That's when I start medications. And at that point, the medications make a big difference. Why do they make a big difference? They make a big difference because what the medications do is protect living cells. The problem with the old perspective is we spent 50 years trying to bring back dead brain. Can't do it. Maybe one day we talk about stem cell research, or maybe one day they will have stem cells they put in bring back brain. But let me tell you right now, we have medications that help the brain stay around longer. They already exist. And most people in stage 3, most people are not on those medications. I could walk into any, say, a club with ages 50 to 65 and screen for Alzheimer's. I'd probably find 10 to 20% that have early memory loss that should be on medication. I refer to this stage as a stage of neglect, denial, and ignorance. Neglect by the medical community to screen for early memory loss. Denial by families and individuals who don't want to admit they're losing their memory. Now, it makes sense why you wouldn't want to admit it. Why do you want to admit you have something that's going to take your life away? Because when people think of memory loss, they think of Alzheimer's, and they think there's nothing you can do. Well, the new perspective is you want to know you're losing your memory as soon as you start losing it. In fact, I think one day, maybe 10 or 20 years from now, we're going to start memory medicines, the same medicines I use right now on a 75-year-old, we're going to start on 40-year-olds who have high risk factors because they're losing their brain cells faster. That's not the standard now. In fact, what I do, the standard I use, which is having that positive test showing early Alzheimer's, I aggressively attack the memory loss. And most of my patients are on at least 4 medications to help protect their memory. And in the Alzheimer's journey, I'm going to give you the exact treatment protocols that I use so you can go to your doctor and request proper treatment. And in battling the memory loss, if you do battle the memory loss at the early stages, I have hundreds of patients, hundreds, who came to me early in their memory loss. I've been at Myrtle Beach for 4 years, and their memories are just about as good as they were 4 years ago, and they're not supposed to be. Now, contrast that with a patient I have by the name of Paul. Paul came to my office, and my office manager said to me, he's upset about being here. When I looked at his chart, I saw he's 64 years old, so I'm thinking he doesn't want to admit he has early memory loss. I walk in the room, and within 10 seconds, I knew he had substantial memory loss. He didn't know what state he was in. I asked his wife, when did you first notice his memory loss? She said 5 years ago. She said he had cardiac surgery, came out of the surgery with some memory loss. We talked to the cardiologist, and he said, just forget about it, don't worry about it, it happens sometimes. Now, if I had seen Paul 5 years before, he'd still know what state it is. Odds are very, very high. He had 5 years of brain cell loss without treatment after he'd already lost his reservoir. And the very sad part of this story is his son is a doctor. As I've said throughout this entire introduction to New Perspective, it's not only lay people, the public, that doesn't understand the New Perspective, it's also physicians. I have a lot of physicians, when they see what I have my patients on, why do you have them on so much medicine? I have them on the medicine because this is the opportunity to keep them from getting disabled by a very severe disease of Alzheimer's because of progression of the memory loss. So I'm convinced, and I see it every day, that patients' memory loss slows down significantly with proper treatment. Now let's move on to stage 4, restoring dignity and relationship. Now understand, you won't get to stage 4 if you protect your reservoir and you battle memory loss. However, if you do get to stage 4, it's important to understand, or if you have a family member at stage 4, it's important to understand that there are treatments. This is an area in our country that is really, really lacking. As I said earlier, I'm the medical director of one of the only units in the entire state of South Carolina. Think about that. People have to come from 300 miles to our unit when they have severe dementia. The stage where you're losing the front of your brain, the person's screaming, they're yelling, they're agitated, they're paranoid. So a lot of parts in the country, there's nowhere to go. I was in upstate New York in an area, and there were 1 million people with one 11-bed unit for this group of patients. And the number of people with severe Alzheimer's is rapidly growing, rapidly growing. The other thing that exists in stage 4 is the lack of knowledge that there actually is treatment. The lack of understanding by physicians that there are things you can do. Probably a third of our admissions to our hospital is because a physician put a patient on something they shouldn't have been on that made them worse. So when we get into the Alzheimer's journey, I'm gonna get specific about the treatment protocols, and I'm gonna get specific about things the patient should not be on that actually makes their agitation worse. But as I said earlier, with proper treatment, probably 90% of the time, at least the vast majority of the patients come to me who are out of control. And again, they may have lost all of their memory. But as I said earlier, with proper medications, you can restore dignity to their life, and you can restore relationship to where they can actually maintain a deep, loving relationship with you for many years. Because stage 4 can actually go for some people 5 to 10 years. I've walked into nursing homes, many different nursing homes, at 10 o'clock in the morning, and half the patients are asleep. What does that tell me? That tells me that they're being improperly medicated. A person doesn't have to spend the last 2 to 5 years, 5 to 10 years of their Alzheimer's disease sleeping most of the time. They can be alert, awake, smiling, interactive, and calm. And again, even though they lost their memory, they're still there. I'll finish stage 4 with a real quick story. Her name is Millie. Millie came to me, actually her daughter who goes to the country club with me referred her to me. She came in the hospital because she was screaming, yelling, hitting the staff at the assisted living. She was 84 years old, and she was beating up people in the hospital. Now, Millie, 10 years before, was the sweetest grandma you'd ever meet. This is part of the disease. I tell my staff all the time, they see these agitated patients who are out of control, and they start blaming them. I said, listen, that's the disease, that's not the person. That wasn't Millie, that was Millie without the front of her brain. So anyway, I started putting her on medication. There's certain rules I follow, which I'll talk about. And to make a long story short, I used to walk into the day room, and Millie would be sitting there, and she'd go, Dr. Van Horn, Dr. Van Horn, Dr. Van Horn, Dr. Van Horn, Dr. Van Horn. I mean, literally say it 100 times in the 15 minutes I was there. When she first got there, would nonstop, nonstop. And then when I leave the room, she'd say to the nurse, I need this, I need this, I need this. Basically, for some people with later stage Alzheimer's, they have what's called a catastrophic reaction, which is they have a very difficult time emotionally and psychologically transitioning from functional to the complete loss of awareness and functionality. And those people are anxious all the time. It's so sad to see. And she basically had no life if we could not get her brain right. And she was there about 2 weeks, and we'd gotten agitation from 100% of her waking day to about 20%, but she still had about 20% a day where she was in this intense distress state. Just Dr. Van Horn, Dr. Van Horn, Dr. Van Horn. I sat down with her daughter and I said, listen, I'm gonna have to put her on higher doses of medications because these aren't working. And there are some risks with higher dose, not a lot of risk, and we follow it very closely, start low and go slow, try to find out, make sure there's no side effects. But I asked her daughter if I had her permission. I had to add an antipsychotic medication. And antipsychotics have an increased risk of stroke and heart attack with dementia patients. But her daughter made the decision that that small risk was not as great as the potential benefit. Well, at the end of 3 weeks, and it took 3 weeks, usually it takes 10 to 14 days, Millie left the hospital smiling, laughing, interacting with her daughter. And she was on the highest dosages of medicine that I ever put an 84-year-old. But she was doing great. And as I tell my families and our staff, if Millie walks out of here like this, 20% miserable, that's the best she'll ever be. So my commitment when someone comes to my hospital is I don't give up until I'm absolutely convinced that they can't be fixed. And in the vast majority of times, they can. So what have you learned today? You've learned that Alzheimer's disease is not a disease that attacks old people. You've learned that Alzheimer's disease is actually the end product of your brain aging and dying over decades. You've learned that you're not powerless, you're not a victim, and there's a lot that you can do to intervene with the aging, dying process. I want to emphasize again, because this is really important, that the Alzheimer's journey is not an esoteric philosophical discussion about a disease. Because I reviewed a lot of different programs before I did this, and most of them talk about the misery of the disease. I'm talking about the solution to the misery. As I said earlier, I treat people and families. I want my patients, I don't care what stage of Alzheimer's they're in, I want them to have the best care, and I want them to have the best life. I hope that the Alzheimer's journey inspires millions and millions of people and physicians to understand not only the end of the disease, where the person's still there, but the beginning of the disease, the development of the brain, the protecting the reservoir, the battling the memory loss. Do you realize how this new perspective can impact the disease, the money that can be saved, the lives that can be improved? If you win the war before stage 4, you don't end up in a nursing home. I also want you to remember very clearly that this is not about research. This is about things I'm doing right now with my patients. The Alzheimer's journey, again, is the information and data in my mind. And understand, that's a lot of information. I see hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Alzheimer's patients every week and every year, over and over. So it's the information and data in my mind transferred to your home so you can use it to benefit yourself and your family. Now I want to talk about what you can expect for day 2, the misunderstood organ, the brain. I started giving this talk about 25 years ago, and some of the details have changed a little bit, but it's still very similar. And the reason I did that was because it was very clear to me back then that most people really don't understand what their brain does, how it functions, and the significance of it. And they certainly really don't understand brain illness. And that was true 25 years ago. That is still true now for the majority of people. But day number 2 will give you a very clear understanding of what it means to have a brain. I'm going to talk about 4 brain basics. That is, your brain is a living physical organ, your brain is like a tub, your brain is like a window, and your brain is like a computer. And I'm going to talk about the 7 primary areas of brain malfunction, so you can actually see if maybe you need to see a doctor and get your brain fixed. At the end of day 2, you will have a better understanding of the brain than 95% of the people have right now. Day number 3 is understanding the war. If I went out right now and asked 100 people, what is the difference between Alzheimer's disease and dementia? Maybe one would know, but probably not. Now think about this. This is a disease that is now affecting millions of people. It is headed for 1 billion people. And most people don't even know the answer to that basic question. So understanding the war is critical to winning the war. I will answer 6 questions on day 3. What is dementia? What is Alzheimer's disease? What is the difference between dementia and Alzheimer's disease? What are the risk factors? What is the prevalence? And what are the 5 most common types of dementia? At the end of day 3, you will have the understanding necessary to go into battle against Alzheimer's disease. Day number 4 is an exciting day. Protecting your reservoir. Remember, this is the most important and the longest stage of the war with Alzheimer's disease. This is 40 to 60 years of making a significant impact on whether you ever lose your memory. On day number 4, protecting your reservoir, I'm going to give you detailed information about what you can do that will definitely decrease your risk of Alzheimer's. We're going to talk about FEP, food, exercise, and protection. If you take 50% of what I give you on day number 4 and apply it to your life, your brain will live a lot longer and be a lot healthier. Day number 5, conquering brain-killing illness. You may not realize, but there's many illnesses of both the body and the brain that accelerate brain cell death. And again, when you talk about your brain dying over 40 to 60 years, Many people have these illnesses for 40 to 60 years. And when they're properly treated, it's much healthier for your brain. But if you don't get treatment or you get improper treatment, then your brain dies a lot faster than it should. I'm going to talk about cardiovascular illness. I'm going to talk about diabetes. Those are clearly associated with an increased risk of Alzheimer's disease. I'm also going to talk about certain brain illnesses that cause the brain to die faster than it should. One illness I'm going to talk about is fibromyalgia. I'm not only going to talk about the illness, I'm going to talk about the treatment for fibromyalgia. And most people with fibromyalgia do not realize that their brain is shrinking much faster than it should. It's dying much faster than it should, and it appears to be directly related to the fibromyalgia and the lack of proper treatment. So at the end of day 5, you will not only know what illnesses are killing your brain, you will understand how to go to your physician and ask for the same treatment protocols that I use that are effective for most of my patients. Day number 6, battling memory loss. Millions of people in the United States right now have the early memory loss of Alzheimer's disease and are not getting treated. Most of them are either denying they have the memory loss or don't know it's early Alzheimer's disease. And the vast majority of even the ones that do know are not getting treatment, and some of who are getting treatment are getting inadequate treatment. My patients who have early memory loss are on at least 4 medications and multiple supplements. And I'm convinced that these medications and these supplements make a huge difference in the progression of their memory loss. On day number 6, I'm going to give you the exact treatment protocols I use so you can go to your doctor and say, this is what I want to be on to slow down the progression of my memory loss. Day number 7, restoring dignity and relationship. On day number 7, you're going to join me to hear about one of the areas of my work that I am the most passionate about. Taking care of Alzheimer's patients in the later stages of their disease. Right now, I have about 20 patients in the hospital who came in screaming, yelling, agitated, paranoid. They couldn't function at home, they couldn't function at the nursing home, or they couldn't function at assisted living. I went into the hospital last year 355 days to take care of these patients. Why? Because I'm the only doctor in this area that does that. So if I miss every weekend, I miss half the days to treat them. And I actually like going in. I like taking the hands of my Alzheimer's patients, rubbing their shoulder and saying, how are you doing today? And understand, half of them don't understand what I'm saying. But all of them experience what I'm sharing with them. And I love to see them leave at the end of their stay with restored dignity and being able to have a relationship with their family. I will give you on day 7 the 7 steps that I go through with each patient to achieve the goal of restoring dignity and relationship. Day 8, Family Guide. I work with hundreds of families who are dealing with a patient with Alzheimer's disease. I sincerely have a lot of respect and care for each of those families. For many of them, it's a really hard journey, and my job is to make it the best journey they can possibly have. Not only by treating the patient, by advising the family. And there's a standard group of questions that I get asked on a regular basis. And I'm going to talk about those, such as driving. When should a person be at home alone? When should a person be in assisted living? What about legal matters? But I'm going to go down the list. And I'm also going to touch on making sure the family member that you, the caretaker, takes care of yourself too. The Family Guide is just my view of how you as a family member should handle the Alzheimer's journey that can go on for many, many years.